was, hey.
Yeah. So I think as far as this essay, I think at least part of it is setting the claim, then validating the claim. So we're asking like, well, what's that one question you asked? Like, how is it a metaphysical question? And what is the normative abstraction? Like she makes the claim first and then later on justifies it, which is kind of backwards sometimes. How people often write is not necessarily wrong,
Right.
but the way she writes is usually like she gives you the claim, then you think about it, say, well, how could that be? And then she usually answers how it could be.
Yeah.
After that, so she doesn't usually assume, but she gets you to think about the question before she answers it. So a lot of people would often write an argument like they bring the conclusion, they don't state it until they get there.
Oh, they first. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I could see some of that on
It's
that.
just a stylistic thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, now we got to when we come to normative abstractions. Yeah, defining principles. Yeah, of how you should be. So what kind of study?
Yeah, I assume
Well,
does she mean creating art from abstractions? Is that the study?
I think just more a process of learning over the course of your life that you can't just jump into it without having thought about these normative abstractions. I mean, you might not think about it explicitly, but at least dealing with those questions and that way of thinking. To reach those abstractions requires a lot of thinking and work and learning. I think you just need study in general, like um, not like
Study
a deliberate, like close study, but more like a study or
a
thinking
study.
about. Yeah.
I'm still confused about what though. Because she says the task. Does she mean defining morality, or does she mean painting something based on? Because like this, the psycho-epistemological process required is still harder. What I don't really know what she means by the psycho-epistemological process is harder. And then is that task? Is it some kind of power over the psycho-epist? I just didn't. I still don't really get it. Like learning, when you said learning, someone who's learning anything, but in this case, it's like the task. I'm not sure what.
Um,
I thought maybe she meant an artist, but I wasn't sure.
no, I don't think she's referring to an artist himself. I don't think it's referring to the making of art. That much I can be sure of. Kind of abstractions. When we come to the task of defining moral principles, the psycho-epistemological process is harder. I think she's just saying the task of defining moral principles commands years of study. And the part of that process includes the psycho-epistemological process, that psychological nature of your epistemology, the psychological implications.
Oh, okay. She does say, and projecting what man ought to be. So
yeah,
maybe she means for the individual to project. I don't know. Anyway, it's not fully clear.
Well, that idea of projecting what man ought to be, that comes from Aristotle. That idea comes from Aristotle because that's what he viewed the task of art, the task of drama in particular.
Oh, really? Projecting what man ought to be. Oh, cool.
What man ought, should, and could be is something Aristotle thought. So Rand is really expanding on that.
Yeah, okay, because here, like, I'll summarize this question because at the start it's not that clear. But basically, I wasn't sure, but I interpreted this as she's saying the task of creating art and being able to put it in an abstraction into a art piece takes years of study. And then I thought this, right? Is she basically saying here, because she's saying there's no way to hold such a sum of like, moral abstractions in your head in like all together. It's because it's so abstract. And we said yesterday, you talked about implications. There's too many implications. And so I thought maybe she's basically saying that, anyway, this kind of studies for the artist, and then his full-time job, this is my interpretation, I'm not sure, full-time job is to integrate abstractions and put them in concrete form. Since no one else can do that, no one else can visualize what a certain morality would look like unless they spend years thinking about it. And then I say, this and that. So some of the questions there are not that important, but
yeah, I think to some extent she is saying that you deal on the one hand, yes, you have to deal with this task of studying these abstractions, or thinking about them, or coming up with them, and considering them, reflecting them, all that. And that's, on the one hand, that's one thing to do. And then on top of that task, there's the actual process of concretizing it. It might not necessarily be skills of like, oh, I'm learning how to draw better, I know perspective better, but rather how to create those concretizations. I mean, that's something you have to do over time, that you don't just come knowing how to make the concretizations, that it requires some integration or consideration of what you're trying to project or display, and also the way you do it. Like, clearly a child, when they're like 5 years old, they're not drawing well, and they don't have enough material to really concretize anything much. So they don't know how to make their abstractions into something concrete, or they haven't had practice doing it or applying it.
Yeah.
I some of what she's talking about, that you can't do this work without having thought about it for a long time. You can't do that work without considering how you bring this thought into something concrete.
When you say do this work, what are you referring to?
Well, like, imagine an artist is trying to convey something about sadness, I guess, or I'm thinking of, say, whatever Rand wanted to portray when she created Howard Rourke. Like, whatever it is she wanted to do, she needed some way to bring her idea, her abstraction, into that concretization, or some way of bringing her judgment, maybe that man has free will and he should live for his own sake. Like, how does one bring that to something concrete? It seems so abstract. How could you make it concrete? So in a way, it takes some learning about how do you make that symbol in your mind into something more real, something more concrete.
Yeah, so it is then basically the artist's role. Although this is her, from what I understand, this is her ideal of what she think art should be. Because some artists would just paint whatever. Like, they'll just, I don't know. I'm sure there's thought into it, but it's like just do some lines and then, I don't know. They just whatever image comes to their head. I don't know if they're necessarily. We'd have to speak to artists, but I don't know if they're necessarily like starting with an abstraction. I guess that was her process.
Yeah, you could argue that if they're doing art, they would be doing this, but if they're just making some scribbles, would you call it art even? I mean, there's nothing wrong with like making some scribbles for like as a design for wallpaper or something. I mean, that's fine. It can make something look nice. It doesn't mean it's art, but it could be a nice aesthetic feel or something like that. Is it art? That would be a different question. I think Rand would claim that that would not be art.
Although, I mean, we'd have to speak to artists, because scribbles is like an extreme, because you might find that maybe when they paint, they don't start with like, I want to paint justice, or it's more like, hey, there's this scene that really stuck out to me, and I want to change it a bit and have someone do this instead and see what that looks like. I don't know if it's necessarily this kind of process. But I don't know. I need to speak to artists really to see, and then to know, like, even of paintings that you like, even like I think Dali would be inspired by his dreams, right? And so in that
Yes.
case, there's no beginning from an specific abstraction and trying to. So I guess this is her approach to what art is.
Yeah, I tend to think a lot of her theory is more about her approach and not necessarily. I don't know if it's a great theory about artists in general. That's kind of the more difficult thing about her theory, where it loses
Yeah,
maybe traction, that it seems difficult to generalize to other artists and other processes.
right.
I mean, I generally agree with her that it is a concretization of an abstraction. It doesn't mean you have to be like, oh, I'm thinking about justice. Now, how do I make it concrete? It could be more of a automated, automatized sort of process, or like you're picking concretes that reflect what you would view as important if you did take the time to think about it, take the time to think it through and all the way, rather than maybe these, you might be an artist might act through intuition a lot of the time. And that if they did sit down and reflect on what it is they're displaying or representing, they could make a connection to their abstractions. And I think that's more what Rand is claiming, that if you did sit down to think about what you've created, you would find a connection to your abstractions. And the better it can do that, the more it fulfills its role as art. The better
Okay.
it can do that, the better the art, things
Yeah.
like that.
Okay. Yeah, and I was just thinking as well, like I guess a classic counterexample to someone beginning with an abstraction would be anyone who writes fiction that is somewhat
Yeah.
representative of actual real life, right? Like
Mhm.
Tolstoy, I think he was a naturalist. I read his moral confession, or no, his book Confession, and the death of Ivan Illich or whatever, but I haven't read his other big books. But yeah, he's just writing about what things are, and then American Psycho, which is just like I don't know if that, there's no abstraction there. That's just some guy
Yeah.
running around murdering people. So in terms of like the actual, I don't mean you can't say there's any philosophy that it represents partially or whatever, but I just mean like beginning from this this idea of psycho-epistemological, defining moral principles and projecting what man ought to be, and then this. But yeah, okay, cool. I mean, I guess we're both on the same page then. So that she does seem to be talking about in the process of like translating an abstraction into a concrete,
Yes, that seems
which
to be
takes
the
years.
most sensible explanation.
Yeah,
I mean, it seems to follow from what her thinking is. I do think she makes some errors on this, but um, really, I'm just starting out just explaining what it is she thought, and I
mm,
think we could take a more reasonable approach to it than she does even. But I do think she's right on this aspect of portraying an abstraction. It's some connection to that concretization role seems to follow from her theory of concepts, and it does seem to be in line with the evidence that I can think of. And um, to give an example of making art, I know when I write short stories, I'm not really thinking about a specific principle. Generally, if I'm writing a character, somewhere in the back of my mind, sometimes I
yeah,
have it like, oh, this character is gonna make it through and defeat their demons or whatever you want to say. But when I'm thinking of different scenes and all that, or what words to pick, I'm not like saying, oh, I'm not explicitly thinking, how do I connect this idea of overcoming your struggles into what word should I pick to convey that? Like, it's a lot of automatic processes, just like a word comes to me and I put it down. It's
yeah,
not like I thought about it consciously, but if I finish the story and look at it later, I can make the connection to what it is connected to in my explicit philosophy, that I can take it apart kind of and see what I was expressing about myself, about my premises and all that. Once I did take the time to look at what I created, to see what the intuitions were connected to.
Yeah. I guess that's how I imagine most stuff is written or
Yes.
painted, but then it really seems like she's saying that there's like a task demanding years of study, which is concretization, like explicit. I don't know if it's explicit, but whatever. Like you've got something, some abstraction, and then you try and figure out what it actually looks like. Um, but I think the way you're describing the process of writing is how most people would write, not
Yeah.
this way, because it's. I mean, if an artist can turn an abstract principle into a particular, then I assume anyone can with work.
Mhm.
But anyway, it's still not fully clear. At least I know what she's saying. I think that's the main thing. And I'm with you on your process for
Yeah.
writing sounds to me like the more common experience.
Yeah, I think you understand what she's saying. I mean, yeah, I think that's the best way to understand what she's saying, because there isn't that much I know of that elaborates on her theory of aesthetics. And that's the difficult thing, that I don't have any other perspectives other than the way Rand wrote it. I don't know other interpretations. So
Mm.
this is the most reasonable way I've been thinking about it with my own experiences, other discussions, and just over time how I've thought about it.
Okay, we're on the same. Yeah, like I'm happy with.
Yeah.
There's not much more I can
Yeah.
go with that. But,
Let's see if there's anything to add with these other questions.
well, I'll tell you because they're not. Some of them are like offbeat.
Okay.
Like this next one, resentment. This is not. I just googled it and I was curious if you know. It's not related to the essay at all. But you know how there's universal evaluations for emotions, and I know like confusion. The essence of confusion is identification of a contradiction on some level. Anger represents injustice, but resentment is that? Would you say that's the same? Like it's just a matter of degree? Um, you know what I'm talking about? Because I tried to Google what's the global evaluation or essence of resentment, and I didn't find anything. But it's pretty hard to find essences of a emotion sometimes.
Well, we can think of it in two ways. Well, what's something more general that resentment is? Like, when you say resentment, maybe like a type of anger or a type of frustration or something like that. Like, what's something more general that
Mm,
resentment is?
I think it's closer to anger than it is to resentment. So, okay, in that case, if it is anger, it's a specific instance of anger, but then it's still a global evaluation of injustice. But that's weird. Strange to, yeah.
I mean, I think of resentment as a type of anger, and what differentiates it from other types of anger is believing you deserve something
That's
and
in.
not receiving it. To me, that's the difference. What differentiates it from other types of anger, or it's almost like a form of jealousy, maybe.
Um, well, yeah, I guess it could be. It's interesting because believing you deserve something but you don't have it is injustice. That's the same
Not
evaluation
necessarily.
of.
I
Um,
mean, sometimes it's right, sometimes you don't actually deserve it.
no, no, I'm not saying it is actually. I expressed it badly. I'm not saying it is actual case of injustice. I mean, it is the global, like it is that evaluation of injustice, whether right or wrong. Like
Okay, yes.
in the same sense that anger is.
Yeah.
So then it does seem like it's tied up. It is an instance of anger, but then what you're saying about jealousy is, I think, you can feel. Yeah, I guess that maybe, you know what? If it's jealousy, like part of jealousy could be, um, there is a sense of injustice there too. So I think it is, like, it's a narrower instance of anger, I think. It's more specific,
Right.
like towards one person or Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's all it's really saying.
Yeah. Cool. So
Sounds right.
definitely identified it. Awesome.
Or that's the process you would usually go through to define something. Like find the general instance of it that applies to other things, and then what differentiates it from those other things.
Sorry.
Like that's what it would mean to define by genus and differentia. The genus being the general category, like, oh, it's a type of anger.
Yeah.
The differentia being what distinguishes it from other types of anger.
Yeah. I'd think about it more, but because it's so unrelated
Yeah.
to the essay, we identified
We'll keep going.
yeah, we identified what it's from. That's the main
Yeah.
thing. So, um, okay, let me get to the core of the meat of the question here.
Didactic
Okay, because
value.
I keep going back to like, she's like, oh, art is just a thing of pure contemplation. It's an end in itself, blah blah blah. And then I'm like, well, and then later in this, it's constantly like, art is an indispensable medium for the communication of a moral ideal. I'm like, yeah, this makes sense to me. It is didactic. Like that's my experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't get all that stuff about, oh, it's pure contemplation and yeah, even Hegel said something like it, art is a vehicle for philosophy. So I
Yeah.
just don't get that. It's from my perspective. Either I'm reading this wrong, or it's just that's yeah, or something else. From my perspective, it seems inconsistent to say like it's contemplation, blah blah blah. It's an end in itself. We discussed this last one, and then it goes on to like it's essential to live. It's essential for consciousness.
Yeah.
It's a medium for communication of a moral ideal. Like to me, that's a contradiction. But
I
yeah,
agree that I think she contradicted herself, and I can't find a charitable interpretation. But as far as didactic, I think that's more narrow. Like didactic, as in like you write a story specifically to teach kids not to lie, and that's the reason you made it was to teach them not to lie. It's like no, it's more than just to teach you this specific thing, or it should be more than just like oh, like Aesop's fables. It specifically tells you what to do, like,
yeah,
or
is that
something like
cool?
that. Art
Yeah.
should be something more broad. Its purpose should be broader than that, than something narrowly like teach kids how to behave properly. Like, no.
What would be like? Isn't in a sense, we could say Howard Rourke teaches, and the other characters teach you what are good like, ways of living and what are not good ways of living. Isn't that?
Yeah, but the didactic value. I mean, let me see where exactly she used didactic to.
Well, I said it, but I
I
think
think yeah.
if you word search, you can see. Let me have a look. Didactic. Yeah, there we go. So I don't know if you can see what I'm searching, but down here, art is not the means to it. I'll just highlight it so you'll
Yeah.
be able to find it. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. It's just saying it's secondary at best. If it is to teach, it's secondary. That value of learning how to live life better, like specifically being taught how, like it's just a secondary consequence.
Secondary to what?
Like the primary would be that its purpose towards life and fulfilling these conceptual needs. I think
But
that would be the
okay,
primary.
because
Secondary meaning.
that's how I interpret the concept meeting conceptual needs as didactic. Because if you go back to this part, that when I've highlighted, there is no way to integrate such a sum without projecting an actual human figure. I don't know if you can see what I'm highlighting at the moment, but it's up here.
Yeah.
Just scroll up. So it illuminates the theory and makes it intelligible, so you can act on a moral theory. To me, that's didactic. Like, um, yeah. Which I don't see anything wrong with. I'm just confused by like what exactly is this whole thing of pure contemplation, and then going on to explain that it's an essential and you need it. Like they're two very different, to me, the way I'm interpreting it, they're two very different things.
Well, I just think of the word didactic, and the way I use it is specifically to instruct how to do something, specifically in instruction, not just having a pragmatic purpose, but specifically intended to instruct something. And I don't think you really could say that it was made in order to instruct, more like made in order to deal with reality better, made in order to deal with broad abstractions. That
Okay.
I would not call that didactic,
Right.
even if
I
it has a practical purpose.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's the word didactic that because I'm probably connect.
Yeah,
I
there
probably
might be
just
a better word. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, we've come to terms with the using Mortimer
Yes.
Adler's lingo. Come to terms with the meaning of the words. Anyway,
Yes, I think so.
uh, let me see what this is about. Um, oh yeah, so what I was working out here is sort of touching on our previous discussion. Like I was thinking maybe what she's talking about is simply an approach, and so it's an approach to um, you can have art that captures a fully explicit integrated metaphysics to help someone um, put it into practice, which I mean, I would have thought is didactic, but again, we throw that away because I guess didactic is specific. But you can have that approach, but it's not necessary. You can also just, I don't know, do whatever, like paint things how they are, or like write a storybook that just comes from your subconscious. Like it's not, but that's different, right? So this is like a very different approach to art.
Yeah, I
Um,
would say it's an approach that, I mean, I think you would necessarily convey something about your abstractions, but a lot of this is an approach and a way to thinking about art. And if you think about this certain way, you'll produce certain kinds of art.
right. Yeah, I mean that makes sense because look, who has without it? She says here, without a conceptual theory of ethics, an artist would not be able to successfully concretize an image of the ideal. Who the hell has a conceptual theory of ethics that's fully integrated? I don't know. I don't think many people do. I think hardly any authors would. I don't. I don't think anyone else I know does. So that would just be, it would just make the point that, yeah, okay, she's striving here for like a kind of art.
Well, in a way, that is what she's saying. Like, how could you not have that if with art? Like, you can't. Well, ethics without art would be like,
Well, she's
mm,
saying, no, no, I think she's saying a conceptual theory of ethics, which is different from, like something implicit. Because in this case, she's talking about like fully integrated, reducible, that kind of thing.
okay, yes, you're right. Art would not be
I thought this was interesting too, but without. So it is like a tool of ethics almost. But then, if I go
it
up, she'd
can.
say it's not a tool of ethics.
Yeah, I mean, it serves a conceptual function that helps you think about these things. It could be entirely personal too. I mean, you can make art for yourself and never show anyone. It could be just a way to concretize things for yourself, even.
Right. Do you think that's a bit because yeah, anyway, I like this yeah, I like this little thing here of ethics is theoretical engineering, art is a model builder. That's pretty cool. Do
Yeah,
you do you think that the whole process, like you're saying, you can make art for yourself, the whole process of when you're, because I don't really make, I don't think I'd make anything, I don't write like novels or anything like that, but or paint. But the process forces you to test it because if you've got some theory of ethics and you try and put it on paper, it's just not working, then something is up. But if you can like capture some belief you have or abstract principle and it seems to play out really well, then like, okay, this does seem to work, this principle. Does that make
as far
sense?
as literature, with literature, yes, I agree with writing.
Ah, cool.
Yes, it it gets weird when you get to music or painting. I don't know if I could say that, but With literature, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess they're different because like musical is like a direct injection into you feeling emotion. So I don't know if it's the same, but
Yes, that's where her theory starts to have issues with music, especially.
yeah,
Even Rand said it's a bit different, but I don't. I think a lot of this really can't apply to music. I think it's a completely different process
right,
when it comes to music.
right. Yeah, it is another discussion. That's interesting with music.
Yes.
But it's interesting what you're saying, like, and so you were agreeing with me. I just thought that I wasn't sure, but I guess then this makes way more sense. If you're like writing a novel or fiction or a short story, it forces you to unravel the consequences of some principle, and then you're like, oh, hang on a second, this doesn't work. Or yes, this is really working and it's realistic. Like you can read and go, this could happen. But if you go, this couldn't happen, it's too it's I have to put in too many magical things, then you know maybe the principle is not
Yeah,
practicable.
or you could even use that weird thing and say, well, imagine I did abstract this away. Would the way reality works change, or would the moral principles change? Like, if you have magic spells, would that change anything about the way moral principles work? I mean, that's one way to think of it. Like, in Lord of the Rings, what would still apply? What would be different? I mean, that could be a way of contemplating what it is about these abstractions that could apply to any type of world. Like, if there is magic, what does that change about the way reality works? And that could bring you to interesting questions and visualizations of how life could be.
Yeah. But what about uh, so when you're writing, like you might decide to put in I don't, why would you decide to use magic in a book? Just for fun?
I usually think of it as a way of the reason I choose to use magic sometimes. I usually don't, but some once in a while I will. Is because I want to focus more on these mental characteristics, perhaps. Like I want to focus more on like their their way of thinking about issues, and like magic is usually like a mental thing.
Right.
Usually, if I use it in a story, so usually it's some way of just representing that
Yeah.
in a symbolic way, perhaps.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm keeping in context of, oh, it doesn't really exist, but let's use it to symbolize something, or let's use it as a way to portray this idea or principle or something like that as a symbol.
Makes sense. Have you ever found you've got some idea you want to capture and then you learn more about the idea by writing about it because you're like you create a story from the idea and then you're like, oh, that's how it can work. And then
I think so, yeah.
oh, so I
Sometimes,
can,
yeah.
yeah. Wow, so it's almost like then the process of even writing fiction is like you trying to potentially make an abstract theory particular, and you get to test it.
Yeah, at least that's my approach. I don't, that is something I want to research to see how other people, how other writers experience that. Because
Yeah.
to me, it just seems intuitive. Like, this is just what I do. I don't know if there's other ways of doing writing that I think are intelligible or convey something meaningful or things like that.
Well, I was in a discussion group, a book group for for Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. One of the guys was saying, like, about Brothers Karamazov, that it's like he drops billiard balls, on a table and hits them against each other and sees what happens. So it sounds like, I don't know if this is his actual approach. So it sounds like even Dostoevsky was like, let me just put all these people who have like different philosophies and try it. He created the characters first, and then he tried to figure out what would happen if they all came together. And so it's almost like then he could learn about. I'm making this up because I don't know if this is actually what he did or why he did it, but there's the Ivan, the extremely rational guy. There's Alyosha, who's like the religious type, and a few other characters. And so it sounds like it was that process of you almost don't know what's going to happen as an author. You just have an idea for or in this case, it's ideas for characters who embody something, and then you put them together and you try and figure out how can I make this work and make sense, and then see what happens.
Mm-hmm. I think Rand would claim that that's necessary for good literature. Like even if there's other methods,
Yeah.
I think Rand's argument this is the way to produce the best kind of art. And that's why she argues later that naturalistic art is not an example of good art,
Got it.
but romantic art, in her view, according to her definition of romantic art, is the ideal that any literary artist should strive to create.
Do you think that, what do you think in terms of the balance of art as to show, like if you're an artist, you want to show people something as opposed to you actually showing yourself something. You're like, I wonder what this looks like, what happens when I put these two people together who embody these two approaches to life, or what happens if this abstract principle, how can I I don't know if anyone thinks that, but whatever, that abstract principle and what will it look like if someone acts that way? And so how much of the artist writing a book or painting or whatever, let's go with writing a book, stick to fiction. Writing a book is him actually trying to learn something himself, as opposed to show other people things.
Maybe explore also, not necessarily learn, but I think many artists that I've read about even speak of how usually they just made something for themselves, regardless of if they would be famous, or at least say Kafka, I think, is a great writer, but he mostly didn't expect anybody to read his stuff. He wanted most of his stuff just burned when he died. He didn't even care, but his friend didn't listen and published it anyway.
Yeah.
And I know Borges did that. Like, he really just wrote for himself, and once he went blind, he just stopped writing. It didn't make him depressed. He just didn't want to anymore, so he stopped.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of artists do understand or find the purpose of art is more a thing you do for yourself and not a thing you do for others.
Right.
Or at least for your mind, I should say.
Yeah, so it is, I didn't know that. So it is then I didn't think about that before actually. So it is then like you said, an exploratory thing. It's almost like, everyone could learn to, I don't know, write fiction then, because even if it's a short story, because then it would be like an exercise in, if they want to test an idea, and you can't go out into reality to do it for whatever reason, like you're kind of limited, then it seems like that would be a really cool way to test a lot of ideas.
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't think about that before. That's cool.
And that does fit into everything Rand is saying here about like concretizing your abstractions and doing like working from your sense of life or judgments about reality. Like you're exploring all these things and you're considering them, thinking about them. And like Rand is saying, show, don't tell.
Okay. Okay, this is the same thing of me going, so we can cross that out.
Yeah, same sort of thing.
Although I am curious, as a side note, have you experienced that thing where what would this person do?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
I mean, I ask it, but not like as any instructive thing. It's like, oh, what would they do? Just as curiosity, but not that it has any purpose really. Other than like, oh, like what would Walter White do? Not that I actually care, but it's like it's fun to imagine it sometimes.
Who's Walter White?
Breaking Bad.
I haven't watched it.
Okay, so he's not a good guy. So.
Oh really? Walter White. Cool.
Yeah.
Even though, let's see. Yeah, see, I don't even this, man. Like it that even though moral values are inextricably involved in art, they are involved only as a consequence, not as a causal determinant. But but isn't that what she's saying before, like the task of that takes years? Isn't that what she's talking about? Translating an abstraction, a moral abstraction into a specific concrete?
Yeah, it's difficult to understand this. I mean, she does seem to bounce a bit on that. Like, I mean, I get that she is trying to say that it's not the handmaid of morality. Like, you don't merely create art as a way to, as like she was saying, just to teach the right way to be. Or like as we were talking about, like you explore things and premises about reality and all of that. And I think that's maybe the more towards the sensible, like what she's talking about. I don't know if she wrote it as clearly as she could have, but I think she's just trying to convey that it, there's this other, it's just about abstractions generally, not necessarily morality.
Oh, okay.
Like some people might think of like the Bible is just to teach you right from wrong, and that's it. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's not. If you treat the Bible as a piece of literature, like there's a lot of it about metaphysics in there, like the nature of reality, like the story of Adam and Eve.
Right.
It's not just an ethical story. It's
Yeah.
even a story about the nature of reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, and then I went this because the more I get, actually, I thought the art section would be enjoyable, and it is because I did learn a lot. But there were actually more things than even in metaphysics that I'd like. What the hell is the like? How does this make sense? Doesn't this just contradict what I read before? Like this as well. She's saying it's not the handmaiden of morality, which I get. Um, and then but before she says the whole point of art is to capture complex metaphysical abstractions. And I'm like, well, so then is it the handmaiden of metaphysics, like what? Yeah, or she says it's the model builder, like she says that science is the no ethics is science. And yeah, before she says ethics is science, and then art is the oh, here we go, yeah, yes. So without the assistance of art, ethics remain in the position of that's like a handmaiden to me. You need art for ethics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's more a connotation of the phrase. Like, I don't really like the word handmaid. It's too metaphorical, and I want precision in the sentence. I wish she had more precision here. I mean, handmaiden of ethics, like that's a metaphor. Like it's not entirely clear what the metaphor stands for.
Oh,
I
okay.
want precision.
Yeah, maybe we're not going to get it in this essay, so we're just going to.
Yeah, and I don't think you really can. Unfortunately, like it's not my favorite essay. Like clearly, like the ethics and epistemology, like those have been powerful to me. But art is usually I'm more ready to argue, and it's not as convincing. I like a lot of it, but a lot of it I question.
Yeah,
Like a lot of philosophers, like I like a lot what they say, but there's also a lot I don't like. So I think like half of this I like. At
yeah,
least half of this I think is great.
yeah.
But the other half is like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, me too.
Which is your
I
reaction?
Yeah, well, I'm open to being convinced, but it's just not very, it's not like, here's why this is true. But there is a couple of things I got. So one is that you can use art to explore abstractions, like even for yourself. It doesn't even need to be for someone else, just to see how realistic they are, if they work, how they work. Because you don't know until you try and like embody it in a character and try put them in a world and see if they can function in that world with those abstractions. So I didn't think about that before, so that's cool. And then I also think the other thing I got after thinking about it for a while was that it makes sense that when something is so abstract, it's hard to keep yourself motivated to work towards it. So you need some kind of like didactic. No, I'm not going to use that. You need some kind of like character that you can hold in mind vividly to keep you motivated sometimes and like summon up
Yeah.
the motivation. But that, I mean, that's the main thing for me, I think. Then.
Yeah. Well, even to sum up the what not to be, like when I mentioned Walter White, like he's a really bad guy. He becomes bad, but by holding him in mind, it's easy to think about the way people go bad, the way people might abandon whatever goodness they had, what moral choices are involved, their view on reality. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot in there. I just think Walter White as a prime example of what it means to be moral or what it means to be immoral and its implications on your life.
Did
Like, and it
you?
doesn't I don't have to think hard. It's just like there he is, and I have everything like associated with this, a powerful image.
Right, and you don't need to like um, because you can summon up like his whole life story in one thing, right? And
Yeah,
you can see how everything played out, which is hard to do in reality. That's the other
yeah,
thing I got is like because it focuses on the essential things. You hold the image of Walter White. You sympathize with Walter White?
no, maybe slightly early on, but he gets progressively worse. It's like at some point, it's like you just lost it, man. At some point, that's how you feel towards him.
Is it a matter of when he starts becoming bad and he does one thing, it's like a slippery slope. It almost forces his
Yes,
hand to do something else because he's now got to
exactly.
cover up some other thing. Interesting.
Yes.
It's like in Crime and Punishment too. Same thing.
Yeah, I mean, the story is, I don't know how much about Breaking Bad you know, but just the basic premise in episode one is that he has cancer, terminal, and he's probably going to die soon. He doesn't have the money to survive, really, or he wants to leave more money for his family, so he starts making meth because he's a chemistry teacher and he's good at chemistry, so he decides, well, I'm going to use that to make meth. Sell a lot of meth, make a lot of money, get out, and that's it. Just leave my family with a lot of money. I die, that's it. Everybody lives happily ever after, but
Yeah.
there's a lot bad things happen, obviously.
And then so maybe that even captures, I don't know if they did that intentionally, but maybe that captures like when you have a principle and you're like, just this one time I'm going to like do something against it, and then it helps you see the ways in which unexpected things happen, and then you do go down a slippery slope.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if it's intentional, I agree, but
I
that's
don't think
kind of
so.
just what art does. Like you end up exploring these things. It gives you a vehicle to do so.
Because you're watching it and you say, this is realistic, this could happen, right? Like, is that
Um, I don't know about the realism per se, but I think like you relate to the emotions, I think is what usually goes on, or you relate to what's occurring, or you like visualizing it. I don't
I
think it's
mean,
necessarily about
when I
that.
say this could happen, I mean like given you make a bad decision, no, not a bad decision, given you do something like I'll just one time cook some meth and then finish up, like it lets you see maybe not that this is what they aimed at, it just turned out this
Yeah,
way, but it lets you see like this is realistic that if I did this, this other thing could happen, and then suddenly I
yeah.
find myself in this situation. It makes it more concrete. Do you reckon that's accurate to say? I haven't watched it, so I don't.
Sometimes for this
Because
show, yeah. For Breaking
in
Bad, yeah.
in Crime and Punishment, do you mind if I reveal a bit from the start? It's right. This thing
It's
happens
fine.
right at the start anyway. So he makes a plan to murder someone, and then he eventually does it. And then he goes to a house he doesn't expect. He like times it so no one else is there, but then her little step daughter shows up, and so he has to murder the stepdaughter as well. And you're like, this could
Oh,
happen,
wow.
because like now he's stuck in this situation. Like someone else came after he already committed a murder, and like what's he going to do now? So he has to kill this other person, and then someone else almost came as well. And so there are all these close calls of like once you can see like once you do something, you're like, well, there's no you don't know where it's going to go after that. It's like it's a big unknown.
Yeah, that's what Breaking Bad is like.
Hmm.
There's situations just like that.
Yeah, okay. It's the same thing. Um, it's the same question I have, which I guess we're both on the same page on. So,
Yeah.
oh, actually, no, this one's not. This one here that I've
Okay.
highlighted. Yeah, like if you're doing, maybe I guess that answers itself. Like, I was just curious why. I mean, maybe this answers itself actually, because I was like, well, why is it that there are some movies that everyone loves, or like, Harry Potter? Why is it so popular? Or even like
Yeah.
50 Shades of Grey? Like, what are they? What metaphysics is that capturing? Like,
Yeah.
why? What is the universal appeal?
Um,
Am I
as far
thinking
as
about it too narrowly? Like, is the metaphysical abstraction so broad that it can appeal to everyone?
um, well, I think the reason Harry Potter would appeal is that it usually has to do something about heroism, because the way Harry is always fighting against Voldemort, against the odds. I mean, I think that's usually something appealing. It conveys a sort of abstraction people like to think about that's meaningful to them, that helps them think about the good in life. I think that's all it really is.
Maybe.
Why is it so universal? It's hard to say, other than people like to feel like they're alive or like to contemplate life being meaningful. And
Mm,
that's the reason they like it.
would you say the abstract part of the abstraction that's in there is courage? Maybe that you could say it's a theme, but I
Yeah,
don't know if that's a
probably.
virtue. Is that a virtue?
Yeah.
Courage.
I mean, not by the way objectivism defined it, but it's often a virtuous thing. To Aristotle, it was a virtue.
What was?
To Aristotle, courage is a virtue.
Oh, courage is a virtue. Maybe it's a kind of part of integrity.
Probably. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let's. I might post on this later and see if anyone else has like thoughts on this strange back and forth of like art is not a didactic and blah blah blah. All right, let's see what this is. Um, oh yeah, I was just curious about like okay, if you're capturing an idea or something you believe is true, is it true that or would it happen that when you're writing you keep getting stuck because you can't make it work? Like if you're trying to capture some strange idea and then you have to keep finding ways to save it through like magic or just coincidence like too much coincidence.
Mm,
Um,
it could. I'm just trying to read through this.
like I read yeah, read through it, that's fine. So,
The contradictions are. I mean, it sounds like she's saying that um, in order with me predicted that. Well, I guess just saying determinism, like nothing is relevant to the context, like, to a determinism where an abstraction is just things are as they are, and just you describe every detail or something. I have a hard time understanding this paragraph. Well, I don't know what she kind of
Probably because of the previous context. I quoted
yeah,
not enough. Let's see.
probably.
So she's just talking about the different schools. So the place of ethics in any given work of art depends on the metaphysical views of the artist.
Mm-hmm.
If consciously or subconsciously an artist holds the premise that man's possessed the power of volition, it will lead him to the value orientation, to romanticism. And then She says, so man's fate is determined, then it will lead him to anti-value she calls orientation, which she calls naturalism. Um, and she says, determinism is irrelevant in this context, just as truth or falsehood of an artist's metaphysical view is irrelevant in the nature. Oh, yeah, that I didn't get either, actually. Um, no. Okay, I get it. So she's just saying that the premises are irrelevant. Like the purpose is just to project a specific metaphysical premise, right? Um,
Yeah,
so whether it's false or good or bad is not the point. Like it can be bad. This is how I'm getting it. It can be like a completely wrong metaphysics, in the sense that it's objectively wrong, can capture something evil, but it may still be good art. That's all I got. Art, what
yeah,
may
I
project a
agree with your
um,
interpretation and the way that Rand likes Dostoevsky. She definitely doesn't like his metaphysics, but she does think he's a great writer.
yeah, and she's saying that the process is the same. This task she spoke about before of like trying to embody the concrete, I guess that's what
Yes,
she means. But then my question
yes,
was, which is not, it's just a more of associative question, not specifically about this paragraph. And you might be in a position to tell me, like, if you're trying to capture an idea in characters, and if there's something wrong with the idea, like, does it mean you'd get stuck a lot? Like you can't make it work. There's like something wrong with the idea, so you just can't make it realistic enough, or you have to like do too much ridiculous stuff to save it. Um, does that make sense? I'm just curious if that's the case, but I don't know if you know.
I know the way I write. I try to I need a logical progression of events in a way that I could see it to the end, that I could connect from point A to point B. And if I getting stuck is a matter of I can't complete the connection in a way that conveys the the way I need to or the way I want it to. If I get stuck on writing, it's because I don't know how to make the reach point B in a realistic way. Realistic being given the assumptions of the story and the rules of this world. How do I get there? And usually I can't think it out enough, or I had to introduce another premise that makes the other ideas sound ridiculous or stupid, or like plot holes, like or MacGuffin, where you just throw in something just as a plot device but has no other purpose.
Right. So then it does sound like this would happen, what I said, because you said the rules of this world. So I assume the rules of the world are not too far-fetched. It's not like a universe where people, speak with light signals and I don't
Yeah,
know, gravity doesn't exist. Because how are you gonna? So if you've got some premise or idea and you can't find a way to make it work, maybe then okay, the idea actually isn't real. Versus if you've got an idea and you keep finding cool ways to make someone succeed with that idea, then it's like it's a good idea, if that makes sense. But it's probably it's a cumbersome way to validate. Like I don't know if that's how you want to validate an idea. So
yeah. I mean, but you could also think like, say in Lord of the Rings, they still communicate by language. I mean, that's still a fact of the world. Like people communicate by talking. There's no telepathy, and you could still get some implications from there.
yeah, yeah, okay. Um, okay,
Or
what I
people
was,
still need to eat to survive, and there's certain assumptions that apply to our world just as much as theirs.
yeah. Although there's obviously you can have stories where no one seems to be eating ever, but
True.
um, yeah, I guess what I was getting at was like I was curious if you've got an idea wrong, then it shows up when in the writing process if you're like struggling to capture something. But now that I'm thinking about it more, it's not a good way to validate an idea by writing fiction. Like the whole process of writing fiction is more because that sounds like a painful way to validate an
Yeah.
idea. The right way would be to no, the proper approach, yeah, is to use it more to see what it looks like.
Yeah. In that way, it's not really to instruct you on the right way to think. It can help you with that, but that's not the reason you're doing it. Like you could explore ideas, think about ideas,
Yeah,
explore premises, and It's more like that,
to motivate you if you want to.
perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do the extra 15 today.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll leave some time at the end just to catch up.
Okay.
We should be able to finish this, which is cool. But let's see. Oh yeah, what do you think of this? This is more just what do you think of it? Like, because there's so many things that happen, you can lose the perspective and the reality of your own convictions. I'm not really sure what reality of my own convictions is, but um, what are your thoughts on that? Just highlighted it.
Let's see.
Amidst the incalculable number of complexity of choices that confront a man in his day-to-day existence, with the frequently bewildering torrents of events. We'll just continue. He
I'll
is
think of
often
it this
insane.
way. I got it. I mean, just imagine you didn't have any, like, imagine a state without art or something, without a way to deal with these abstractions. You're just going through your day, maybe drifting, you could say, or you see all these things around you that you might feel overwhelmed. There's a huge amount of events. There's a lot to deal with and many choices, and it could feel overwhelming and even alienating. And you could even start to lose perspective that
Sorry, it can feel
if any,
overwhelming. And what was the other word you used?
like by feeling overwhelmed, like nothing seems consistent.
Oh, okay.
That you lose perspective of your convictions because, like, what's the point of your convictions? Everything's overwhelming. It doesn't matter what you think. Things will happen anyway. And then you can lose any sense of conviction that whatever conviction you have that, I don't know, that you can be a moral person. You might lose that conviction that is possible by being so overwhelmed or even not bothering to think about abstractions anymore. I'll just throw it all away because what does it matter? There's so much around me. I can't even deal with it. So you're always confronted with that. Unless you have a vehicle like art to do so, that then you can start to handle it. Then you won't feel overwhelmed and you won't feel maybe that despair or that empty feeling.
That's interesting because I don't know if I can. Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you mean like because that was hard for me to understand or know that people feel that without art? But do you think that would it be? Is it something like moods? If you're in a bad mood and you're focusing on different kinds of things, but then you read some art piece and it kind of like recenters you to look at the world in a different way. Is that sort of what like you're motivated
Yeah,
like
I think of it like that. I think of it like that. I mean, even if regardless of what kind of art it is, I think it still does that. It sets your thinking. It grounds you in a sense. It gives you something for your abstractions to hold on to.
Yeah, okay. Um, do you find when you read fiction, like years later, you just forget the characters anyway? So it's not like you've got anything to hold on to. You don't really remember that much.
Depends. Depends on the book and how much it resonated with me.
Yeah. Mm. So I guess that would be a case for only reading things that resonate with you, since there are like 200 million published books.
Yeah, but
If
I
you're
do
reading art,
remember characters of a novel. Like I guess it really depends.
yeah.
I mean, that's why I don't seek art just as a specific learning tool. Just like I'm consuming it to like for these abstractions, for this thinking, and that's all it is. I'm not trying to like discover a new way of thinking necessarily, as
Oh,
much
okay.
as putting a place for my abstractions to concretize them, to think about them.
I
And I
do
don't think
approach.
there's really a
Yeah,
oh,
sorry,
you
continue.
do.
Sorry,
Yeah, I
go on.
mean, maybe a few books I've done that with. It's not like I've never read a book just to get like, oh, what's this perspective, what it's like. But often those books will just might bore me and I just stop. I
Yeah,
don't bother finishing.
yeah. Do you, actually, I'm keen to get more explanation of this overwhelm thing. Like, so what's that like when people feel, what do you think? Like, have you experienced that, this thing of like when you don't have art? Because I'm trying to pin like, I definitely have moods as well when I'll like I'll be more depressed and I'll just feel like, oh, what's the point anyway? Like, why do people,
Yeah,
like, what, there's no meaning to anything. But I can't really connect it to art. That's the, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Um,
yeah,
I'm struggling to make some definite connection to like, I didn't get my dose of art when I was in a bad mood. Like,
yeah. That's harder to say. I don't think it really could eliminate those feelings, but I think it gives you a way to handle it. I mean, that's the best way to put it. Like,
okay.
so you're going to be suicidal. Like, I mean, I could imagine without anything, then you really would be even more overwhelmed. Is how I put it. Like, if you're just talking about noticing a lot and it's difficult and you need a way through, in a way, it's art that can help you through it. Perhaps that's how I like to think about it. That when
Yeah,
you
mate.
do hit a difficult time, that's when you can start using it.
Need to find the right art. That makes sense though, because I think of like, let's say someone who told me they went through a breakup and then they read some book and it like, um, I don't know, what's it called? Made them want love again or something like that. So maybe there is something to. So that's like one example I just thought of, but yeah,
Yeah, and I've heard many people say like, "Oh, this album saved my life." Like, I don't relate to it, but people seem to say it like with a lot of conviction. So I mean, I guess it means something that
yeah.
helps them through a bad time.
Just